My son's name was Daniel. He was 11 years old when they found the tumor. He was 13 when he died. I want to start there, with those two facts, because everything else in this story sits inside them. Everything that happened with my family, with my marriage, with the people who left and the people who stayed and the people who showed up at my door 7 days after I buried my child, all of it exists inside that frame. Daniel, 11 to 13. 2 years. He was the kind of kid who collected things, not obsessively, not in the way that sometimes signals something else, just with genuine, patient interest. He went through phases. For a while it was rocks, specific rocks, not just any rock. He had a system, categories, a notebook where he wrote descriptions in handwriting that was neater than mine. Then it was stamps. Then it was old maps. He had found one at a garage sale, and something about the way old maps show the world as people imagined it, with the edges uncertain, caught him and didn't let go. When he was 10, a year before the diagnosis, he told me that his favorite thing about old maps was that they showed what people were brave enough to draw even when they didn't know what was there. He was 10 when he said that. I have thought about it approximately every day since. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday in March. He had been having headaches. Not dramatic headaches, the kind that make you stop what you're doing and put your hands over your eyes. The quiet kind, the ones he mentioned and then didn't mention again, because he wasn't a child who liked to make things bigger than he thought they were. His teacher noticed before I did. She called me in February and said Daniel had put his head down on his desk twice in the past week, which he had never done before, and she thought I should know. I took him to our pediatrician. The pediatrician ordered imaging. The imaging showed what it showed. I was in the room when the radiologist explained it to me. I was sitting in a chair across a desk from a man who was being careful and precise and kind in the practiced way of someone who has delivered this kind of information many times and has learned to hold the weight of it without collapsing under it. I heard everything he said. I understood everything he said. And somewhere in the middle of understanding it, I had the specific experience of the room becoming very still, the way a room becomes still when something shifts that can't be unshifted. I drove home. Daniel was at school. I sat in the kitchen, and I called my mother. My mother and I had always been close, or I had always believed we were close, which is a different thing. And the distance between those two things is something I spent 2 years learning. She answered on the second ring. I told her what the imaging had shown. I told her what the radiologist had said. I told her what the next steps were. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Oh, sweetheart." She said she would tell my father. She said she would call me later. She said she loved me. She called back that evening. She said my father was very upset. She said they were thinking of me. She said to keep her posted. That was the tone of the 2 years that followed. Keep me posted. I need to tell you about my family. My parents live 40 minutes away, 40 minutes by highway, under an hour in bad traffic. This is relevant because the distance they maintained during those 2 years was not geographical. I have 2 brothers. Marcus, who is 3 years older than me and lives 15 minutes away, and Joel, who lives in the same city, 20 minutes. My sister-in-law, Marcus's wife, had a difficult relationship with me that predated Daniel's diagnosis by several years, for reasons that are their own story. My brother Joel had recently started a new relationship that was absorbing most of his attention. My parents were 61 and 63, healthy, retired, with time that was their own. I am telling you this not to build a case, but because I want you to understand that when I say my family was absent, I am not talking about people who were far away or overwhelmed by their own hardships. I am talking about people 40 minutes and 20 minutes away who had the capacity to show up and chose not to. The first treatment was in April. I took Daniel to the hospital at 7 in the morning. He had his backpack. He had his current collection item. He had moved on from maps by then to something new, small carved wooden figures that he found at secondhand shops. He had 3 of them in his jacket pocket. He held my hand in the waiting room. He was not a child who held hands at 11. He had reached the age where casual physical contact with a parent was something you accepted rather than sought, the particular independence of almost middle school. But in that waiting room, he reached over and took my hand without saying anything. We sat like that for 40 minutes until they called his name. My mother had said she might come. She had said she'd try. She wasn't there. None of my family was there. I did not fully process this at the time. I was in the mode that parents enter in medical crises, the operational mode. The one that is about the next step, and the next decision, and the specific management of the thing that is happening. There is no room in that mode for sitting with. The feeling of looking at the waiting room and seeing no one there for you. The sitting with it comes later. It always comes later. The treatment schedule was brutal in the way that pediatric oncology treatment schedules are brutal. Every 2 weeks, sometimes more frequently. Long days in the hospital, evenings managing side effects, nights sitting next to a bed where my son was doing the hard work of fighting something inside his own body that he had not asked for and could not reason with. School became part-time, then intermittent, then something we managed around the treatment schedule rather than the other way around. I worked remotely, which I am grateful for. I cannot imagine doing what I did those 2 years without the flexibility I had. But working remotely while managing a sick child is its own particular form of sustained exhaustion, the kind that doesn't announce itself dramatically but simply accumulates, day by day, until you find yourself sitting at your desk at 10 at night, unable to remember if you've eaten. I had help. I want to be clear about that. I had help from people who were not my family. My neighbor Carol, who is 67 and has a bad knee and still showed up at my door with food twice a week for 18 months. My friend Priya, who drove Daniel to 3 different appointments when I had work conflicts that couldn't be moved, and never once made me feel the weight of asking. Daniel's teacher from 5th grade, who was no longer his teacher but who sent him cards every 2 weeks without fail, for 2 years, cards with small drawings in the margins because she knew he liked that sort of thing. These people were not my family, but they were, in every way that mattered during those 2 years, my family. My mother called every week, sometimes twice a week. The calls followed a pattern. She would ask how Daniel was doing. I would tell her. She would say how hard it was to hear. She would ask if there was anything she could do. I would say it would help if she could come and sit with him so I could sleep for a few hours. She would say she'd try to work it out and call me back. She did not call back. Or she called back and said she couldn't make it this week. Something had come up, but next week she would try. Next week she would try. My father called less frequently. When he did call, he asked specific questions in the manner of a person processing through information rather than through feeling treatment. Timeline, doctor names, procedure specifics. He was, I think, managing his own fear by staying at the level of facts. I understood this, and I also understood that understanding it didn't change the fact that Daniel's grandfather, 38 minutes away by highway, did not come to see him during the first 8 months of treatment. Marcus came once. In the summer, about 4 months in, he stayed for 2 hours. He was uncomfortable in the way that people are uncomfortable around illness when they have not learned to sit with discomfort, moving through the house with a kind of restless energy, picking things up and putting them down. He asked Daniel how he was feeling and Daniel said fine and Marcus said that was great and then ran out of things to say. He left before dinner. Joel came twice in 2 years. Both times briefly, both times because I had asked directly, which was the only way visits from Joel happened. He did not think to come without being asked. And when asked he came and was warm and present for the duration and then did not come again until asked again. I want to tell you about something that happened 8 months after the funeral. I was going through Daniel's room. Not to pack it up, I wasn't ready for that. And I have since learned that there is no timeline for readiness with that kind of task, and anyone who tells you otherwise does not understand the thing they are talking about. I was just in there, sitting on his bed, the way I sometimes was, being in the room where he had been. I found a notebook, not the rock collection notebook from years ago, a newer one, a spiral notebook with a dark blue cover that he had apparently been writing in during the last year of his illness. I opened it. It was not a diary exactly. It was more like what he had always done with his collections, a system of notation. an attempt to categorize and understand things. Except the things he was categorizing were not rocks or stamps or maps or wooden figures. He was cataloging the people in his life. There were headings. Under each heading, notes, small observations, the things an 11 and 12-year-old notices about the people around him in the particular clear-eyed way of children who have not yet learned to see past what is actually happening to what they are supposed to believe is happening. Under Carol, brings soup on Tuesdays and Thursdays always. Doesn't stay long. Knows I don't like staying long. Under Priya, drives fast but not scary fast. Sings along to songs and pretends she's not. Under his teacher, her cards always have drawings. I draw back sometimes but not always. Under my name, stays. Always stays. I read this several times. Then I turned to the page that had my mother's name on it. He had written, calls but doesn't come. I think she loves me but I think she's scared. Under my father, came once and talked about maps. Made me feel known. Under Marcus, came once. Didn't know what to say. Left before dinner. Under Joel, came twice. Warm when here. Not here much. He had seen it. All of it. With perfect clarity. Through the particular clean vision of a child who has learned not to confuse what he is told with what he observes. He had seen it and he had named it accurately and he had not, as far as I could tell, from the notebook, been particularly bitter about it. The entries were not angry. They were just precise. I sat with that notebook for a long time. I told my mother about the notebook on a Thursday. I didn't read it to her. But I told her it existed and I told her what Daniel had written about her. She was quiet for a long time. Then, she said, he was right. I said, I know. She said, I love him. I loved him. I was scared. I said, he knew both things. She started crying. The real kind, not the polished kind, the kind that comes from somewhere that has been waiting. I let her cry. After a while she said, how is that possible? That he knew both things? I said, he was his father's son. His father Daniel's father, my ex-husband, from whom I had been separated for 3 years, was a person of unusual emotional clarity, which was one of the things I had loved about him and one of the reasons our ending had been genuinely sad rather than bitter. He learned to hold complicated truths. My mother said, I want to be better. I said, I know. She said, I am being better. The Thursdays I said, I know, Mom. I see it. She said, is it enough? I looked at her, at my mother, 62 years old, sitting across my kitchen table with red eyes, asking if what she was offering was enough. I said, it's what there is. We work with what there is. I want to tell you the thing I have been moving toward this whole time. There is a particular thing that happens when you are failed by the people who were supposed to be there for you. A particular residue. It lives in the place where certain expectations used to live. And because it is an absence rather than a presence, it is easy to mistake for nothing.it is not nothing.it is the shape of what you needed and did not get. And that shape stays even after the immediate pain passes, even after forgiveness, if forgiveness is the thing you choose. Even after Thursdays and Saturday calls and the long work of rebuilding, the shape stays. What I have learned slowly, through therapy and time and the particular education of having lost something irreplaceable, is that the shape is not the enemy. The shape is information. It tells you what you needed. And knowing what you needed is the beginning of knowing what to ask for next time. I needed people who stayed. Carol stayed. Priya stayed. His teacher stayed, in her way, with her cards and her drawings. My family, with some exceptions, and after some time, is learning to stay. I am learning to let them. Not because the 2 years are erased. They are not. Not because the absent months are forgiven in the sense of being undone. They are not that either. But because I am alive and they are alive, and Daniel, who saw clearly and held complicated truths and wrote it all down in a dark blue notebook, would have some opinion about what I do with the time I have left. I think he would want me to hold the open hand. So I am trying. The fox is on my nightstand now. When my father called the Saturday after I found the notebook, I told him about it. I told him what Daniel had written about the Fox conversation made me feel known. My father was quiet for a long time, then he said, "I'm going to hold on to that for the rest of my life." I said, "Me too." He said, "He was the best of what I could have hoped for, as a grandson, as a person." I said, "He was." He said, "I should have been there more. I know I should have." I said, "Yes." He said, "I'm going to be there more, for you, going forward." I said, "I know, Dad." And I meant it. Not as certainty. I had learned not to confuse intention with reliability, but as genuine belief that the man on the other end of the Saturday phone call was trying, in the way that people try when they have understood what they got wrong. That is worth something. Not everything, but something. Tell me something in the comments. Have you ever had someone show up after it was already too late? Not in the way of a story, just honestly. Have you ever been the person who showed up late? Or the person waiting for someone who kept saying they'd try? What did you do with it? I read every single comment, every one. I started at the beginning. I told them about the waiting room the first day of treatment. I told them about calling my mother that night and asking if she could come so I could sleep, and the calls back that said she'd try but couldn't make it. I told them about the 11 months before my father's first visit. I told them about Marcus's 2 hours in the summer and the restlessness and leaving before dinner. I told them about calling each of them in October and saying, "Come now if you want to see him," and the single visits that followed. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I spoke the way I had learned to speak during 2 years of talking to doctors and insurance companies and school administrators, with precision, with sequence, with the specific calm of someone who has learned that emotion clouds the message. And the message matters. I told them about Carol with her bad knee bringing food twice a week for 18 months. About Priya and the car rides and the Tuesday night she came over and sat with me until midnight. About his teacher and the cards which I had known about and the letters back which I hadn't known about until the funeral. I told them that these people, none of whom shared my blood, had given me more of themselves in 2 years than my family had. I told them that I did not hate them for it. I told them that I understood fear and discomfort and the particular ways people fail when they are confronted with something they don't know how to hold. I told them that understanding it and accepting it were different things, and that I had spent 2 years confusing them, and that I was done confusing them. I said, "I am telling you this not because I want to punish you. I am telling you this because if anything is going to be different going forward, you need to know what was true about what just happened. All of it." I stopped. The room was very quiet. My mother was the first to speak. She said, "I don't know what to say." I said, "You don't have to say anything right now." She said, "I thought." She stopped. Started again. "I thought you had it handled. You always had it handled. I thought you didn't need." She stopped again. I said, "Mom." She looked at me. I said, "I am a person, not a system. Having it handled is not the same as not needing anyone." She put her hand over her mouth. My father said, "You're right." I looked at him. He said it again. "You're right about all of it." He said it in the way he says hard things quietly, without preamble. The directness of a man who doesn't offer words casually and means them when he uses them. I was afraid. I didn't know how to be there for something I couldn't fix. So, I stayed at the level I knew, the facts, the logistics. I told myself you were managing. I used that to let myself stay away. He said, "I am sorry. I don't expect you to." He stopped. "I'm just sorry," Marcus said. "I didn't know it was that bad." I looked at him. He said, "I mean, I knew it was serious, but I didn't let myself know how serious. I came that once and it was I didn't know how to." He stopped. "That's not an excuse. I know that." Joel said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "I should have been there. I knew I should have been there. I just kept." He stopped. "I don't have a better answer than that." His wife, Marcus's wife, said nothing. She was sitting slightly apart from the others, in the way of someone who knows that this particular accounting does not primarily involve her. I want to tell you what did not happen in that room. Nothing was resolved. No wound was closed. My son was still dead and he had been sick for 2 years and my family had been largely absent for 2 years. And none of what was said in that room undid any of that. I want to be clear about this because I think we tell ourselves stories about moments of confrontation that give them more power than they have. We imagine that if we finally say the true thing, something will seal, something will close. It doesn't work that way. What happened in that room was the beginning of something, not the end. And beginning things, when you are 7 days out from burying your child, is not what it sounds like. What I felt, when everyone had finished speaking, was not relief. It was something more like the absence of a weight I had been carrying for so long that I had stopped noticing it as separate from myself. The weight of all the things I had not said, of all the adjustments I had made to protect people from the truth of what their absence had cost. That weight was gone. Whether anything grew in its place, that was a question for later. The months after a loss like that have their own texture. People use the word grief as though it is a single thing. It isn't. It is many things that take turns. Some days it is the specific grief for Daniel himself, for the person he was, for the person he would have become. Other days it is a grief for something more abstract, the version of life that no longer exists. And some days, not often, but some, it is a grief for the things that happened alongside his illness. The 2 years of being alone in a way I had not expected. The particular loneliness of having family who were reachable and choosing not to reach. I moved through all of these. I had therapy. I want to say that clearly because it matters. I went to therapy. I went consistently, and it helped in the ways that therapy helps when you actually do the work of it. It did not fix anything. It helped me understand what I was carrying and why, and how to carry it without collapsing. My mother started coming over on Thursdays. This was her idea. She called and said, "I want to start coming over on Thursdays. I'll bring lunch. We don't have to talk about anything specific." I said, "Okay." The first Thursday she came and we ate and we talked about things that had nothing to do with Daniel or the 2 years prior, about a book she was reading, about a trip my father was planning, about a neighbor of theirs who had gotten a dog. Small talk, the kind that families do when they are maintaining contact around a wound without pressing on it. The second Thursday was the same. The third Thursday she brought a photo album. Old photos, me as a child, Marcus, Joel, family vacations and Christmases, and the ordinary documentation of a family's years. She didn't announce why she brought it. She just set it on the table and opened it. We looked at it together. She pointed at a photo of me at about 8 years old, holding a fish I had apparently caught, looking at it with an expression of complete bewilderment. She said, "You had no idea what to do with it." I said, "I still don't." She laughed. A real laugh, sudden and genuine. I laughed to it was the first time I had laughed in I didn't know how long. The specific surprise of it, the way your body decides to laugh before you decide to let it, was its own kind of information. My father and I had a different kind of reconnection. He started calling on Saturday mornings. Short calls, not long ones. He would ask what I was doing and I would tell him, and he would tell me what he was doing, and we would talk for 10 or 15 minutes and hang up. One Saturday he asked if I still had Daniel's wooden fox. I said, "Yes." He said, "I think about that conversation we had about it, the criteria he used, the system." I said, "Me too." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He was remarkable." I said, "He was." He said, "I didn't tell him enough when I had the chance." I said, "He knew, Dad." The fox conversation, he talked about that for a week. My father was quiet in the way of someone processing something. Then he said, "I'm glad." Those Saturday calls continued. They still continue. They are not dramatic. They are just contact, regular, reliable contact from a man who had not been reliable in his contact when it cost more. I take what is offered. I hold it at the right distance. I let it be what it is rather than what I need it to be. Marcus is harder. His wife never apologized, and I have stopped expecting her to. She maintains a careful neutrality at family events that is its own kind. of statement, and I have made my peace with the fact that her relationship with me is something I do not control and have decided to stop performing effort toward. Marcus himself is someone I am still figuring out. He is not a bad person. He is a person who was afraid and who stayed away because he was afraid. And when confronted with that fact, he acknowledged it without flinching, which is worth something. But there is a distance between acknowledgement and change requires the repeated, small work of showing up differently, not dramatically, not with grand gestures, but in the ordinary persistent way that trust is actually built. Marcus calls sometimes, not on a schedule. When he calls, we talk, and the calls are genuine. I do not know yet what will become of our relationship. I am holding it in the open hand rather than the closed one, neither gripping nor releasing. Joel is warmer and less reliable, which is its own kind of thing to manage. He appears suddenly and completely and then is absent for weeks. I have learned that this is simply who he is, and that his appearances are real even if his consistency is not. I want to tell you about a specific night. Daniel was 12 by then, about a year into treatment. It was a Tuesday in November, and he had had a bad day, the specific bad days that come in cycles during that kind of treatment, when the body is fighting onto fronts at once and neither one is winning cleanly. He was in bed. I had been with him most of the day. By 8 in the evening he was asleep, and I went to the kitchen and I sat at the table and I looked at my phone and I thought about calling my mother. I thought about all the times I had called. I thought about all the times she had said she'd try and then called back to say she couldn't. I thought about the specific arithmetic of 2 healthy retired people 40 minutes away and the number of times they had come in 11 months, which was 0. I did not call my mother. I called Priya instead. She answered on the second ring and she listened and she said, "I'm coming over." I said, "You don't have to," she said. "I'm already getting my keys." She came over. We sat at the kitchen table and she didn't say much. She knew by then that I didn't need someone to say much. I needed someone to be there, and we drank tea, and at some point I cried in the way I hadn't let myself cry with Daniel in the next room, and she sat with it without trying to fix it. She left at midnight. I thought about my mother the whole time. Not with anger, with a sadness that was different from anger, a grief for something I had believed was true that I was slowly having to accept was not. Daniel had a good period in his second year. The treatment was working in the way that treatment sometimes works, not perfectly, not completely, but enough that there were weeks where he felt like himself, where he got up in the morning with something approaching his normal energy, where he cared about his collections again, and about the show he was watching, and about the argument he was having with his friend about which was better, oceans or forests. Oceans, he said. Always oceans. Because of the maps. During that good period, my parents came to visit. Both of them. They came on a Sunday afternoon in April, and they sat in the living room, and my father talked to Daniel about his wooden figures, and my mother made tea, and it was, for about 2 hours, the thing it should have been. Daniel showed my father his newest figure, a small carved fox he had found at a shop downtown. He explained how he chose them, his criteria, the system he used for deciding whether something belonged in the collection. My father listened with the full attention he gives when something genuinely interests him. He asked questions, good questions, the kind that told Daniel he had been actually heard. Daniel glowed. After they left, he said, "I like when Grandpa actually talks to me." I said, "I know." He said, "He doesn't do it that much." I said, "No." He said, "Why not?" I did not have an answer I could give him. I said, "Some people don't always know how to show up, but when they do, it's real." He thought about this. He said, "That's kind of sad." I said, "It is a little." He said, "But the fox conversation was good." I said, "It was a great conversation." He got worse in the fall. The good period ended the way good periods end, in that kind of illness, not with a dramatic announcement but with a gradual withdrawal, a slow dimming of the things that had briefly returned. The energy, the interest in the collections, the morning momentum. By October he was in the hospital more than out of it. I told my family. I called each of them. I said, the doctors are not optimistic. I said, if you want to see him, come now. I said it plainly, without softening it, because I had learned that softening information gave people permission to treat it as less urgent. Then it was, my mother came. She came once, in October, and sat with Daniel for 3 hours. She held his hand and told him stories about when I was little, the funny ones, the ones that made him smile even when smiling required effort. When she left, she hugged me in the hallway and she was crying and she said, I don't know how you've done this. I did not say what I was thinking. I said, I had to. My father came the following week. He came alone, without my mother, which was unusual. He sat with Daniel and he told him about a trip he had taken as a young man to see the coastline, and how the maps he had looked at before going hadn't been right, and how the real thing was always different from the map, but that was the point of going. Daniel liked that. My brothers each came once more. Briefly, Daniel died on a Thursday morning. In December, he was at home. That had been his choice, when there was still a choice to make, and I had done everything required to make it possible. He had his collections around him. The carved fox was on his nightstand. I was with him. I don't have words for this part that feel adequate, and I have decided not to try. Some things live outside language. What I will say is that he was not afraid, and he was not alone, and that is what I had been working toward for 2 years, and it is what happened. After, I sat with him for a while. Then I made the phone calls. The days between his death and the funeral are a particular kind of time that I don't think has a good name. You are in the logistics of grief. There are things to organize, decisions to make, people to notify. And those logistics are both terrible and, in a strange way, a mercy, because they give the body something to do while the mind is still trying to understand what has happened. My family was present for those days. My mother came and stayed. My father came every day. My brothers came. There was food and there were people in my house and there were arrangements to be made and my family helped make them. I was grateful. I am still grateful for those days. The funeral was on a Monday. It was a small service, which was what I had wanted. Close friends, a few of Daniel's friends and their parents, the people who had actually been there. Carol was there. Priya was there. Daniel's 5th grade teacher was there. My family was there. The service. His teacher stood up without being asked and spoke about the cards. She said she had sent him one every 2 weeks for 2 years and that every single one he had written back to, and that his letters had been the best letters she had ever received, and that she wanted everyone to know that. I had not known he wrote back. I cried in a way I hadn't yet allowed myself to cry. 7 days later, my family showed up at my door, all of them. My parents, Marcus and his wife, Joel, unannounced. On a Sunday afternoon, a week and 1 day after the funeral, I opened the door and they were standing there in a cluster on my porch, and my mother was holding something, a dish, food, the reflex of people who don't know what else to bring, and my father was standing slightly behind her, and my brothers were on either side. I stood in the doorway and I looked at them. My mother said, "We wanted to check on you." I said, "Come in." They came in. They arranged themselves in my living room the way families arrange themselves in the configurations of long habit, the specific seats and postures of people who have been in rooms together for decades. My mother put the food in the kitchen. She came back and sat next to my father. No one said anything for a moment. Then my mother said, "How are you doing?" I looked at her. I want to describe this moment carefully, because it is the center of the story. I was 37 years old. I had spent 2 years managing a terminal illness, largely alone, with help from friends and neighbors, but not from the people 40 minutes away who shared my blood. I had watched my son die. I had buried him 7 days ago, and my family was sitting in my living room asking how I was doing. I was not angry in that moment. Anger is hot and I was not hot. I was something colder and clearer, the specific temperature of someone who has run out of the energy required to be anything other than direct. I said, "I want to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you respond." My mother looked at me. My father looked at me. My brothers looked at me. I said, "Okay," and I told them.